Hello, friends, Romans, countrymen. My name's Clay Wirestone. I'm the Kansas Reflector Opinion Editor.
I'm Sherman Smith. I'm the Editor-in-Chief.
And we are here actually in our office for once for this weekly podcast to wrap up week 10 of the Kansas legislative session and look ahead, yes, to week 11. We didn't think that there was necessarily going to be a week 11, did we, Sherman?
We were blessed with one more week of action from the State House.
So things happened all last week, and they will be happening at least some of this next week, but we will be getting into that. Let's talk about week 10 first. So it was just, for want of a better term, just a gusher of news and news stories.
Yeah, if we look tired, it's because we are. I think we were, as a staff, putting out 6 to 10 stories a day, every day this week. And there, we could have written about a whole lot more.
And as I think we've said in the past, this isn't necessarily how it's supposed to be or how it's supposed to go. It is just, I think, sometimes a tactic used by leadership. They like to kind of jam stuff in the last week or so, and we're kind of seeing that happen now.
It doesn't have to be this way, right? They could steadily pass things throughout the year if they wanted to, and not wait to shove everything into conference committee reports, which they haven't even started yet. And that's how most of the stuff will actually get passed.
So just starting off, for one of the issues that I think certainly our readers and lots of folks in Kansas have been interested in for a long time, property taxes. Rising home values means that people are paying a lot more in property taxes. There was yet another property tax proposal that came up this last week.
Yeah, some of the other ideas that have already been debated and passed by one chamber or the other, basically the House doesn't like what the Senate wants to do, the Senate doesn't like what the House wants to do, so they keep shooting down each other's proposals in a tit for tat. The latest idea is that the House said, well, let's drag up this idea that we had a year ago. It would be another constitutional amendment, so it would have to go to voters. And if the voters approved it, it would go back to the legislature to actually then make it happen. It would just give the legislature the option to someday cut property taxes. And it would do it in a couple of different ways. There's one way it would really benefit elderly Kansans, and then they're just kind of looking at putting a lid on the assessed values of homes and how much that can go up, saying it has to be fair market value or rolling average over a number of years, the fair market value, whichever is lower. So that's the idea that the House had. They got that over the finish line in the House, and the Senate took one look at it and said, no, we're not doing that. Maybe the Senate just wants to fine tune it. Maybe the Senate has its own idea. The two sides are still working to try to find some way to save face.
And then a bill that came up right at the beginning of the session finally made it across this finish line here towards the end, which was a bill banning cell phone use in schools.
Yeah, this underwent a couple of transformations. It's something that Governor Laura Kelly said in her State of the State that she wanted to do at the start of the year, had bipartisan support. A lot of the anguish is about whether to only apply this to public schools or include private schools. Both are actually included in or covered by the bill. At one point, they were looking at just making this a suggestion to schools, but it is a mandate now. It is an unfunded mandate. It looked like it could end up costing schools like $16 million to, get the pouches or whatever you need to lock the phones away during the day. But the governor signed the bill. It's on the books now. We'll see if it makes kids smarter.
Well, and we'll see how it's implemented.
That too.
Because I have to assume that the State Board of Education is going to have some sort of guidelines or guidance that eventually comes out for this. So, lightning round, because so much stuff happened this week.
Right.
It's difficult to come up with top 2 or top 3. Just give us a smattering, Sherman, some of the things.
Yeah. And just to be clear, a lot of these things, maybe they pass both chambers, but in slightly different form. Sometimes that's intentional. They'll just change like the date that the law goes into effect. And what they're trying to do is get as many bills passed through both chambers as possible, even if they're not in matching form, just so they have what they refer to as shells, things they'll come back next week and they'll take 3 or 4 things and put them into one, and then pass that, and then have these empty bills now that they can put, exciting new stuff in that we haven't even calculated yet. So with that in mind, the things that are passing through that we touched on this week, the pair of anti-abortion bills went through. They're trying to clamp down. There's a bill that would try to clamp down on a loophole that allows some school officials, if they're contractors, nurses, for instance, SROs, others, to have sex with students. Apparently the age of consent in Kansas is 16. And so what they want to do is say, if you're working in a school, basically in any capacity, you're defined as being in a position of authority, and so you can't do this anymore. Law enforcement said they're aware of at least 2 instances where somebody was able to evade charges because of this loophole. And other bills want to shield local law enforcement and county jails from liability for working with ICE to detain immigrants. This is because insurance providers have tried to pull their coverage, saying, you guys are locking away people who are U.S. citizens who have never committed a crime. That's a real problem. And so, there's a real issue, I think, that a local law enforcement agency has or a jail has, and whether they want to risk a lawsuit over that. This would give them protection to go ahead and do, the president's bidding in his mass deportation campaign. There's a bill out there that would require students to pass a citizenship test before graduating. It would also require them to take a class where they learn how bad socialism is, and thanks to an amendment from Representative Brooklyn Mosley, a Democrat from Lawrence, also learn how bad fascism is now. We have a bill that would let the Attorney General step in and block a city or a county or other local government from filing a certain kind of lawsuit that he doesn't like. This is because Ford County a couple of years ago entered into a lawsuit where they're suing big oil companies for making false claims about plastics and whether they can actually be recycled. There's a bill that would allow 23/7 liquor sales during the World Cup when it's here over the summer. So liquor stores, restaurants, bars, whether you're selling it like a liquor store or by the drink, it would open that window to 23 hours a day, every day. And there's also, we saw a controversial bill go through the House that would lower the academic standards for those who are teaching nursing at the institutions in Kansas. That's just scratching the surface.
Well, and the overarching issue with all of these bills, and indeed everything that's happening at the Kansas State House right now, is this is kind of like a game of musical chairs with only 2 or 3 chairs and a lot of people. At some point that music is going to stop. There's going to be 2 people in the chairs and all the other people are going to lose out. By that, I mean all of these other bills, 2 or 3 times as many pieces of legislation are kind of being worked and floated out now as will ever actually become law.
And as we hinted at earlier, the goal from leadership has always been, at least in recent history, to intentionally place this stress on legislators, on anybody else who's over there trying to get things done, so that they can impose their will on what does get passed or doesn't get passed.
And of course, Governor Laura Kelly will end up having a say in all of this too. She has the ability to veto bills. One of the things that's happened, I think, as at least for me, looking at these stories this past week, looking at the vote totals, most of these bills are not being passed with veto-proof majorities at this point. Some of them are quite far from veto-proof majorities.
Yeah, that bill about allowing round-the-clock drinking during the World Cup, that passed the Senate 21-19, the narrowest margin possible. Not necessarily that she would veto that, but it's just an example. Not everything is passing strictly on party lines. And of course, the other part of this, even those bills that do have supermajority, we're going to get to the veto session in mid-April. There always have those House members that decide, I'm tired of this, I'm not going to run for re-election. And it's their opportunity to just kind of spite leadership or just actually vote how they want to vote on things. And so there's no guarantee that any of this would survive a veto.
Well, and then there's also just the mere fact of the mechanics of people come in, it's for the last day, it's called sine die. Sometimes sine die is at the end of the veto sessions. I mean, sometimes these things are separate, sometimes they're together.
Right.
The point is, no one wants to come back for a 3 or 4 day veto session. They want to get it done in a day or two if possible. So that's another funneling mechanism.
Yeah, we're going to start talking about this coming week, and they have until Friday of this coming week to finish all their business. They don't have to go that long. They could get out early. As of now, they're scheduled to come back for 2 days, April 9th and 10th, to override any vetoes that they can, that the governor might issue during that break. There's no guarantee that it's limited to those 2 days. We've seen strange things happen before. Also, during those 2 days, they could still pass new bills if they want. And then the sine die, is it
sine die, whatever.
Sine
yes.
die.
The last day.
Yeah, the last day. In recent years, they just say the last day of the veto session is the last day. But sometimes they do come back for that one final day a couple weeks later, just in case something that they just passed gets vetoed and they want to override that as well.
So, we've already kind of made the transition to talking about this week, because this is the week where, supposedly the final week of passing stuff. We still haven't had a budget passed.
That's the one thing that they have to do. It's the one thing they haven't done yet. That's the biggest thing that we're watching for this final week. What is in the budget? How much does it cut? Some of the weird things that we've written about earlier that got inserted in one side or the other that have come up. Things like banning students from protesting in school. We'll have to keep track of all that.
Cuts to public broadcasting, all of this, all of these other things.
Yes, the wine and cheese crowd is under
That's
scrutiny.
right. And now, apparently, we'll talk about that later. My column on the topic was mentioned on the House floor in a fairly friendly manner. And Sherman, anything else you'll be watching out for here as we kind of work at this last week?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we always look for are those last minute surprises. I mentioned the so-called shell bills. They'll start bundling a bunch of this stuff together into a single bill, and that leaves these other bills just kind of vacant. And so they can grab one of those, put literally anything they want into it, and then run it out on the floors with no chance to amend. It's an up or down vote. And in total, you might see people having to make 50 votes or maybe more every day on these, what they call conference committee reports. It's impossible for any individual to read all of these. So they're just, trusting what leadership is telling them, or trusting what committee chair is telling them, or a colleague is telling them. They have to make their votes based on that. And so we'll see what actually gets passed, what doesn't. It's all part of the chaos at the end of the session.
Well, and frankly, kind of bait for campaigns as well.
Yeah, we saw this in the property tax debate in the House where, Democrats were going, we realize this vote is going to look great for you guys on postcards because we're all voting against it. But the reason we're voting against it is because it doesn't actually provide any property tax relief. It says, trust that a future legislature will someday provide property tax relief. That's not actually property tax relief.
So it will all be happening. It will all be going down. I understand. Believe me, we understand, because we're doing this every day. It can feel like a lot. It can feel like a burden.
It's because it is.
to follow this stuff. But on the other hand, this is actually also where it gets really important. Mm-hmm. And so, do whatever you can. If you're interested in keeping up day to day, we have our daily newsletter. You can sign up at kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's kansasreflector.com/subscribe. I was getting ahead of myself in saying it there.
It's free.
It's free. It comes out every day at 4 a.m. And you can keep up with everything that's going on.
Yeah. All our stories, of course, are free to read. There's no paywall here, no advertisement.
We should also note that we had our Sunshine Week fundraiser last week. You can go to kansasreflector.com/donate if you would like to help us in our mission to provide this news to everyone for free as a public good.
Your support is always appreciated.
And with that, my name's Clay.
I'm Sherman.
Take care.